Hello everyone, this is Chi and welcome back to my art space. In this video, I am going to review the brand GCQuill painting canvas panels and Boldmere paper palette. This pack contains 14 pieces of 10 by 10 canvas panels which are meant to be 100% cotton and acid-free. They are triple primed with acid-free gesso and can be used right away. They claim to be ideal for acrylic painting, oil paint, and mixed media art. At the time of purchase, they were on offer for £11.99, ordinarily priced at £19.99, so it was a great bargain. So here's a panel. It's just plain on the back and nothing special here. Here's a closer look on the surface. You can see the almost linen-like pattern. Let me compare it with a proper watercolor paper panel so you can see the difference on the textures. You can see that the watercolor paper panel has a texture of a not watercolor paper. Whereas again, this canvas panel has a linen-like texture on the surface, and you can definitely feel the texture in this canvas. Next, I will also be using Boldmere's paper palette. Boldmere is a brand that I often see in a shop called The Works here in the UK. It's like a cheap arts and crafts shop. As you can see, it's only £2 for 30 tear of sheets, and it's my first time using anything like this, so it will be an interesting experience for myself. It's basically wax paper which claims to work best with oil, acrylic, and watercolor paints, and it measures 23 by 30.5 centimeters. I'm also going to use my Himi Gouache set for this painting to test the paper palette. If you have not seen a Himi Gouache set before, it does come with its own plastic palette, and as you can see, I have already used mine a few times. That's why they are already stained. This is how I typically use my gouache. I use a palette knife to get some paint, and in this case, I am trying out the paper palette. So I'm just going to put the paint here. It's a weird experience because I can feel the waxy surface of the paper. So I clean my palette knife and take the next paint that I need. You just repeat this until you have every color that you need. I do this because I wanted to keep the rest of the gouache set sealed in its case while I paint because I don't want them to dry out. I am a little bit impressed already with the paper, and I can see how it's going to work. Make sure to clean your palette knife before picking a new color to avoid contamination, and clean the knife again before storing. For this video's painting, I will be using the free brushes which came with the Himi Gouache set. I don't store it inside a box, although you can do it if you like, but I keep mine in my jar with the rest of my brushes. So on to the most important part, testing everything by painting. So far, I am really getting the hang of using the paper palette. It's growing on me fast. I am also enjoying how the gouache is applying on the canvas surface. If you watched my review of the Himi Gouache set, which I will link above, I wasn't very happy on the application there as I already have a first wash of gouache on the canvas and the application was just not as smooth as when you were applying it on this canvas for the first time. So far, I found that the gouache does tend to dry quicker being exposed like this on the paper palette, and I had to occasionally spray water on it to make it more pliable, but the paper palette held brilliantly with a continuous spray of water and mixing of paint. My thoughts on the canvas now. Although I am enjoying painting on the canvas this time, it's still hard to make a solid pass of paint on the canvas surface. There are still areas where you can see patches of canvases where the paint just failed to fill in. Perhaps more water was needed. To be honest, I have not been using my gouache set a lot, and I know that I need more practice to master this medium. The only reason really why I don't use my gouache so much is the aftermath or the cleaning up after using it. I suppose it's because I tend to compare it with my watercolors, wherein with my watercolors, if I use my palette and if I have paints on it, I can just let it dry and put it back in the case, and that's it. I've basically stashed it away, knowing that I could always reactivate the paints on the palette and reuse it again. Whereas with the Himi Gouache, that became a problem for me. I found that it's basically impossible for me to leave the leftover paint on the white palette that comes with the set, because if I use it to cover the rest of the gouache set, it might contaminate the paint underneath. So I used to just wash the palette again, and I feel so bad seeing a lot of paint wasted because it's my fault. I couldn't gauge how much paint I'd need. That's why I used to put a lot on the palette and just decide how much to use, and then I was hoping to save the rest later, which became impossible when I used the plastic palette that came with the Himi Gouache set. I know that you can say I can store the palette facing up, like with the paints facing upwards, but then I haven't actually tried it, but I was so scared that the paints would then stick on the cover of the gouache set, which I don't want to happen as well. That's how I've always used my gouache set. Like I showed you earlier in this video, I usually take a little bit of paint and put it on the palette and then close the gouache set to prevent it from drying out. And I actually have a year-old Artex gouache set, and they're still fairly moist, and they still haven't cracked or dried up. So I suppose my method kind of works. I'm hoping it will work with this Himi Gouache set as well. So far I've had this for a while, I think a couple months now, and there's still no signs of drying, which I'm really happy about. As I've mentioned earlier, I try to save the unused paints by transferring it back to the jelly cups. I make sure that I have a clean palette knife and then choose the uncontaminated, unused paint and just transfer it back to the jelly cups. I did try to get as much paint as I can to save it. You can see that I've left some paint on the paper palette. I wanted to make sure that I have some left, which I can use to polish the paintings if need be later on. I like to use this white palette upside down like this to avoid contact with the paints and also to provide additional seal in hopes to keep my paints from drying out. Here's a look on the paper palette after I've used it a lot for mixing my gouache paints. I'll try to keep these paints on it and see if I can reactivate it later with water after drying on it. There is a perforated side here that you can use to tear off the page to use a fresh page if you do not want to keep the paints on it. My thoughts on the canvas again. The canvas can definitely take layers upon layers of paint and probably needs that to cover everything with the paint, as I've said, because it does tend to leave some white patches of areas wherein the paints haven't filled it in completely. I will try painting with other mediums on this canvas. I bought it primarily really for my watercolor paints because I love the watercolor paper panel so much that I thought that I could paint watercolors on a canvas as well. So I will try my watercolors in this and maybe try acrylics as well and see how it fares. So after using the paper palettes, I do love the idea, and I think that it will make me paint using my gouache set more, knowing that I wouldn't have to worry about paint contaminations and washing my palettes, because it is kind of hard to wash gouache paints on your either a plastic palette or your porcelain palette. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you have enjoyed my video and see you on the next one. Take care. Bye!